My name is Kellan Brooks, and I used to think I was pretty good at reading people. Turns out, I couldn't read my own wife if she came with subtitles and a user manual. It started with a text message on a Tuesday morning. Vanna was making her usual breakfast smoothie, kale, spinach, and whatever other green stuff she convinced herself would keep her looking 35 forever, when her phone buzzed against the granite countertop. The sound echoed through our kitchen, like a gunshot in a library. "I need to talk to my ex. Privately. Don't worry." She said it without looking up from her blender, like she was discussing the weather or asking me to pick up milk. Don't worry, right. Because nothing says, "don't worry," quite like your wife announcing she needs private time with an ex-boyfriend. "Which ex?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm an IT security consultant, which means I spend my days thinking about all the ways people can lie, cheat, and steal in the digital age. You'd think that would make me paranoid about my personal life, but apparently, I save all my suspicion for other people's networks." "Elliot Drake," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "From the agency. He's having some personal issues." Elliot Drake. I knew that name. Vanna worked at Pinnacle Advertising, one of those sleek downtown firms where everyone wears designer clothes and drinks coffee that costs more than most people's lunch. Elliot was her boss, tall, silver-haired, drove a Porsche that probably cost more than our house. "Personal issues," I repeated, "and he needs to discuss these with my wife because—" Vanna's jaw tightened. After 15 years of marriage, I recognized that look. It meant I was asking too many questions, and she didn't appreciate it. "Because we're friends, Kellan. Because sometimes people need someone to talk to who isn't their spouse." She turned off the blender with more force than necessary. "I thought you'd understand that." Maya and Jax, our 13-year-old twins, chose that moment to thunder down the stairs like a herd of caffeinated elephants. Maya grabbed a piece of toast, while Jax poured cereal into a bowl, both of them oblivious to the tension crackling between their parents. "Dad, can you drive us to school today?" Maya asked. "Mom's meeting is early." I looked at Vanna. "Meeting?" "With Elliot," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I told you." No, she hadn't told me. She'd mentioned a private conversation with an ex, but nothing about a meeting. The distinction mattered, though I couldn't quite articulate why. After the kids left for school and Vanna headed out for her meeting, I sat in my home office staring at 3 monitors filled with client security reports. But my mind wasn't on firewalls and encryption protocols. It was on my wife's face when she said Elliot's name, the way her voice softened just a fraction, like she was handling something fragile. I've always been good with computers because they're logical. They follow rules. Input leads to output in predictable ways. People, on the other hand, are messy and complicated and full of variables you can't account for. But after 15 years of marriage, I thought I'd figured out Vanna's operating system. Apparently, I was running on outdated software. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Clara. "Drinks tonight? You sound like you need them." I hadn't talked to Clara in 3 days, but she had this uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong. Maybe it was twin telepathy. She and I were born 2 minutes apart, though she never let me forget I was technically the older one. "Can't. Family dinner." "Liar. Vanna's book club is tonight. I follow her Instagram, remember?" "Right. Vanna's book club. The group of women who met monthly to drink wine and discuss whatever literary masterpiece they'd chosen, though I suspected the wine got more attention than the books. I'd forgotten it was tonight, which meant Vanna would be out until at least 10. "Fine. Murphy's Tavern at 8. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Clara owned Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar on the South Side that served the best burgers in Chicago and attracted the kind of clientele who appreciated both good food and privacy. It was the perfect place to think, which was exactly what I needed to do. But first, I had work to finish, and maybe, just maybe, a little research to conduct. I pulled up a new browser window and typed Elliot Drake into the search bar. LinkedIn showed me his professional profile. Vice President of Client Relations at Pinnacle Advertising, MBA from Northwestern, married to Lena Drake. His photo showed a man in his early 40s with the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't charm his way out of. His Facebook profile was locked down tight, but his Instagram was public. I scrolled through photos of expensive dinners, weekend trips to Napa Valley, and shots of that famous Porsche. In several photos, he was with his wife, a blonde woman with sharp cheekbones and the kind of smile that looked practiced. Then I found something interesting. A photo from 6 months ago, taken at some industry event. Elliot was standing with a group of colleagues, including Vanna. She was wearing a red dress I remembered buying for her birthday, and she was looking at Elliot with an expression I hadn't seen her direct at me in years. It was the kind of look that made my stomach clench and my hands curl into fists. I closed the browser and tried to focus on work, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes I found myself checking my phone, waiting for a text from Vanna about how her meeting went. By 3 o'clock, I gave up and decided to take a drive. I told myself I was just running errands, but somehow I found myself parked across from Cafe Luna, a trendy little place downtown where Vanna sometimes met clients. I wasn't sure why I was there until I saw her car in the parking lot, a silver Honda that I'd helped her pick out 3 years ago. Through the cafe's large windows, I could see her sitting at a corner table with a man I recognized from his LinkedIn photo. Elliot Drake looked even more polished in person, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He was leaning across the table, speaking intently, while Vanna listened with the kind of focused attention she used to give me when we were dating. I sat in my car for 20 minutes watching them talk. At one point, Elliot reached across the table and touched Vanna's hand. She didn't pull away. When they finally stood to leave, Vanna was laughing at something Elliot had said. It was her real laugh, not the polite chuckle she used at dinner parties or parent-teacher conferences, but the genuine, unguarded sound she made when something truly amused her. I hadn't heard that laugh in months. I followed them out of the parking lot, staying far enough back to avoid detection. They drove separately to a small park on the outskirts of downtown, where they met again and walked along a tree-lined path. I parked at the far end of the lot and watched through binoculars I kept in my emergency kit. They walked close together, their shoulders almost touching. When they reached a secluded bench, Elliot put his arm around Vanna's shoulders. She leaned into him like she belonged there. I sat in my car for another hour, watching my wife with another man, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak, not yet. It was something sharper and more dangerous. It was the moment I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life was wrong. When I got home that evening, Vanna was already getting ready for book club. She was wearing a black dress that hugged her curves and heels that made her legs look endless. "How was your meeting with Elliot?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Fine," she said, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. "He's going through a rough patch with Lena. I think they might be heading for divorce." "That's too bad," I said. "Anything I can do to help?" Vanna paused, lipstick halfway to her mouth. "Help with what?" "With whatever personal issues he's dealing with. You said he needed someone to talk to." "Oh." She finished applying her lipstick and capped the tube. "No, I think he just needed a friendly ear. You know how it is." Actually, I didn't know how it was. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never felt the need to seek out an ex-girlfriend for emotional support. But apparently, Vanna operated under different rules. "Well, if there's anything I can do," I said. She kissed my cheek, leaving a faint trace of red lipstick on my skin. "You're sweet, but I've got it handled." After she left for book club, I sat in the living room with the twins, helping them with homework while my mind raced. Maya was struggling with algebra, and Jax needed help with a history report. But I kept thinking about the way Vanna had leaned into Elliot's embrace. "Dad, you're not paying attention," Maya complained. "I asked you the same question 3 times. "Sorry, sweetheart. What was the question?" "How do you solve for x when you don't know what y equals?" I looked at the equation on her worksheet, but the numbers seemed to swim before my eyes. How do you solve for x when you don't know what y equals? It felt like a metaphor for my entire life. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "you have to test different values for y until you find one that makes the equation work." Maya nodded and bent over her worksheet, but I was still thinking about variables and unknowns when my phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "You're late." I'd completely forgotten about our plans. I left the twins with strict instructions to finish their homework and drove to Murphy's Tavern, where Clara was waiting with 2 beers and a concerned expression. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Thanks. You always know just what to say to cheer a guy up." Clara slid a beer across the table. She looked like a female version of me. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same stubborn jawline. But where I tended to internalize my problems, Clara faced them head-on with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "What's going on?" she asked. I told her about the text message, the meeting, the cafe, the park. I told her about Vanna's laugh and Elliot's arm around her shoulders, and the way my wife had looked at another man like he was the most interesting person in the world. Clara listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When I finished, she took a long sip of beer and shook her head. "That witch," she said. "We don't know for sure that anything's happening," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Kellan, I love you, but sometimes you're denser than concrete. Your wife is having an affair." "You don't know that." "I know Vanna. I've watched her manipulate people for 15 years, including you. She's selfish, image-obsessed, and she's always thought she deserved better than what she had." I wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Clara had never liked Vanna, but she'd always been civil for my sake. Now, apparently, the gloves were off. "So, what are you going to do about it?" she asked. "I don't know. Confront her, I guess. Ask for the truth." Clara snorted. "And you think she'll just confess?" "Oh yes, Kellan, you caught me. I'm sleeping with my boss and planning to leave you for his money and connections. Come on. You're smarter than that." She was right, of course. If Vanna was having an affair, she wasn't going to admit it just because I asked nicely. She'd lie, deflect, and probably turn it around to make me feel guilty for being suspicious. "Then what do you suggest?" I asked. Clara leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with something that might have been excitement. "You're an IT security expert, right? You know how to find information people don't want found?" "That's different. That's work." "No, that's a skill set. And right now, you need to use every tool at your disposal to find out what's really going on." I stared at my beer, watching condensation drip down the sides of the bottle. "You're talking about spying on my wife. I'm talking about protecting yourself and your kids. If Vanna's planning to blow up your family, don't you think you deserve to know about it before it happens?" When I got home that night, Vanna was already in bed, reading a romance novel with a shirtless man on the cover. She looked up when I entered the bedroom, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "How was book club?" I asked. "Good. We're reading The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo next month." She closed the book and set it on her nightstand. "How was your evening with the kids?" "Fine. Maya's getting better at algebra." We went through the motions of our bedtime routine, brushing teeth, changing clothes, setting alarms. But there was a distance between us that hadn't been there that morning, an invisible wall that made the king-sized bed feel like an ocean. As Vanna settled in beside me, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. Clara was right. I needed to know what was really going on, and I needed to know before Vanna had a chance to destroy everything I'd worked to build. I was good at finding hidden information. It was what I did for a living. And if my wife was planning to betray me, I was going to find out about it. The game was about to begin, and for the first time in my marriage, I was going to play to win. The next morning, I started my investigation the way I'd start any security audit, by identifying potential vulnerabilities and gathering intelligence. The difference was that this time, the target was my own life. I began with Vanna's digital footprint. While she was in the shower, I used a keylogger program to capture her laptop passwords. It was a simple piece of software that recorded every keystroke, the kind of thing I used to test client security systems. Installing it took less than 30 seconds. "You're up early," Vanna said when she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel with her hair dripping wet. "Couldn't sleep," I said, closing my laptop. "Big project at work." She nodded absently and started getting dressed. I watched her select a burgundy dress that accentuated her figure and wondered if she was choosing her outfit for me, for her colleagues, or for Elliot Drake. After she left for work, I called my buddy Gabe Morrison, who ran a small tech consulting firm and owed me several favors. Gabe was the kind of guy who could hack into anything with a processor and an internet connection, though he was careful to keep his more questionable activities on the theoretical side of legal. "I need a favor," I said when he answered. "What kind of favor? The legal kind or the don't ask questions kind?" "The second kind." There was a pause. "This wouldn't have anything to do with your wife, would it? Because Clara may have mentioned something about—" "Clara talks too much. Clara cares about you, and she's worried. What do you need?" I explained what I wanted: discrete surveillance equipment, software to monitor text messages and social media activity, and a few other tools that existed in the gray area between legal and illegal. Gabe listened without judgment, which was one of the reasons we'd been friends for 20 years. "I can get you what you need," he said. "But Kellan, be careful. Once you start down this road, there's no going back. Whatever you find out, you're going to have to live with it." "I'm already living with it," I said. "I just don't know what it is yet." That afternoon, I picked up a package from Gabe containing everything I'd requested, plus a few items I hadn't thought to ask for. Along with the surveillance equipment, he'd included a prepaid phone, a small GPS tracker, and a note that read, "For when you're ready to take the gloves off." I spent the evening installing hidden cameras in strategic locations around the house: the kitchen, living room, and home office. The cameras were tiny, wireless, and virtually undetectable. I also placed the GPS tracker in Vanna's car, hidden beneath the spare tire where she'd never think to look. The next few days passed in a blur of routine activities, masking covert surveillance. I monitored Vanna's text messages, tracked her location, and reviewed hours of footage from the hidden cameras. What I found was both more and less than I'd expected. The text messages were the smoking gun I'd been looking for. Vanna and Elliot were in constant communication, exchanging messages that ranged from professional to personal to intimate. They used code words and inside jokes, but the subtext was clear. They were having an affair, and they were planning something bigger. "Can't wait for our trip to Brazil," Elliot had written. "Just the two of us, no complications." "Soon," Vanna had replied. "Once everything is settled here." Brazil. I'd never heard Vanna mention any interest in traveling to Brazil. And what did "settled here" mean? Was she planning to leave me? Leave the kids? The GPS tracker revealed a pattern of secret meetings. Twice a week, Vanna would drive to locations around the city where she'd meet Elliot. Sometimes it was the cafe where I'd first seen them together. Other times it was a hotel bar downtown or a secluded park on the north side. But it was the hidden camera footage that provided the most damaging evidence. 3 nights after I'd installed the equipment, Vanna brought Elliot to our house while I was supposedly at a client meeting and the kids were at their friend's house for a sleepover. I watched the footage later that night, sitting in my home office with headphones on while Vanna slept upstairs. Seeing another man in my living room, drinking my coffee and sitting on my couch, was like being punched in the stomach. But it was the conversation that really got to me. "When are you going to tell him?" Elliot asked, his arm around Vanna's shoulders. "Soon," she said. "I just need to figure out the right way to do it. Kellan's going to be devastated." "He'll get over it. Men like him always do. They're too passive to fight for what they want." Men like him. Too passive to fight. I rewound the footage and played it again, memorizing every word. "What about the kids?" Elliot asked. "They'll adjust. Kids are resilient. And honestly, they'll be better off with a stepfather who can provide for them properly." I paused the video and stared at Vanna's face on the screen. This was the woman I'd loved for 15 years, the mother of my children, talking about replacing me like I was a broken appliance. But it was what came next that really set my plan in motion. "I've been thinking about the money situation," Vanna said. "Kellan has a decent retirement account, and there's equity in the house. If I play this right, I should be able to walk away with enough to start fresh." "What about alimony?" Elliot asked. "I'll get that too. Kellan won't fight me. He's too nice, too concerned about what people think. He'll want to keep things civil for the kids' sake." They were right about one thing. I did want to keep things civil for the kids' sake. But they were wrong about everything else. I wasn't too passive to fight. I was just strategic about picking my battles. And this was going to be a battle worth winning. I spent the next week planning my counterattack. The first step was protecting my assets. I quietly moved money from our joint accounts into a personal account Vanna didn't know about. I also contacted a lawyer, not for divorce proceedings, but to understand my rights and options. The second step was gathering allies. I called my sister Clara and my friend Gabe and explained what I'd discovered. Both of them were eager to help, though for different reasons. Clara wanted revenge on the woman who'd hurt her brother. Gabe was motivated by intellectual curiosity and a love of elaborate schemes. The third step was reconnaissance. I needed to know more about Elliot Drake, his weaknesses, his secrets, his vulnerabilities. If I was going to destroy him, I needed to understand him first. That's how I found myself sitting in my car outside Elliot's house on a Saturday morning, watching him wash his Porsche in the driveway. He lived in an upscale neighborhood where the houses were large and the lawns were perfect. His wife Lena was working in the garden, wearing designer clothes that somehow managed to look casual and expensive at the same time. They looked like the perfect couple, but I knew from experience that appearances could be deceiving. If Elliot was willing to cheat on his wife, there were probably other secrets he was hiding. I was right. It took Gabe less than 24 hours to hack into Elliot's personal and professional accounts. What he found was a pattern of financial irregularities that suggested embezzlement. Elliot had been skimming money from client accounts for months, hiding the theft through creative bookkeeping and false invoices. "He's stealing from his own company," Gabe explained over the phone. "Small amounts, but it adds up. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. Can you prove it? I can document it. Whether that's the same thing depends on how good his lawyers are." I thought about Vanna's comment about starting fresh with money from our divorce. Now I understood where the real money was coming from. Elliot wasn't just stealing my wife, he was stealing from his employer to finance their new life together. That gave me leverage, and leverage was exactly what I needed. The first shot in my war against Vanna and Elliot was subtle, but effective. I used Elliot's stolen login credentials to send an anonymous tip to Pinnacle Advertising's corporate headquarters, detailing the financial irregularities in his accounts. I didn't provide enough evidence for them to prosecute, but I gave them enough to start asking questions. Within 48 hours, Elliot was called into a meeting with the company's CFO and head of human resources. I knew this because Vanna came home that evening in a state of barely controlled panic. "Elliot's having problems at work," she told me over dinner, trying to sound casual. Some kind of accounting issue. That's too bad, I said, cutting into my steak. What kind of accounting issue? I don't know the details. Something about client billing discrepancies. Maya looked up from her plate. What's a billing discrepancy? It's when the numbers don't add up the way they're supposed to, I explained. Sometimes it's an honest mistake, and sometimes it's something more serious. Vanna shot me a sharp look. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. These things happen in business all the time. Of course, I agreed. I'm sure Elliot will get it sorted out. But I could see the worry in Vanna's eyes. She knew as well as I did that accounting discrepancies in a company like Pinnacle Advertising were rarely innocent mistakes. The second shot was more personal. I'd been monitoring Elliot's social media accounts and noticed that he had a standing golf game every Thursday afternoon at an exclusive country club, the same country club where his wife Lena volunteered for charity events. I created a fake social media profile and used it to send Lena Drake a private message. You should ask your husband about his Thursday afternoon meetings with my wife. They're not playing golf. I included a photo I'd taken of Elliot and Vanna together at the park, along with timestamps showing when Elliot was supposed to be on the golf course. Lena's response came within an hour. Who is this? What do you want? I didn't reply. Sometimes the most effective ammunition was the kind that let people draw their own conclusions. The third shot was aimed directly at Vanna's social circle. She prided herself on her reputation among the other advertising executives' wives, a group of women who wielded social influence like a weapon and treated gossip like currency. I'd been listening to Vanna's phone calls with these women, and I'd learned that they were all secretly jealous of each other's marriages, careers, and lifestyles. It was a powder keg of resentment waiting for someone to light the fuse. Clara helped me with this part of the plan. She'd bartended long enough to know how to extract information from people, and she had a talent for stirring up trouble when the situation called for it. I need you to accidentally run into some of Vanna's friends, I told her. Let slip that you're worried about me because Vanna's been spending a lot of time with her boss. You want me to spread rumors? I want you to plant seeds. Let them draw their own conclusions. Clara grinned. I can do that. Which friends? I gave her a list of names and their favorite hangout spots. Within a week, Clara had coincidentally encountered 3 of Vanna's closest friends and expressed her concerns about my marriage. The results were immediate and dramatic. Vanna's phone started ringing constantly with calls from friends who wanted to know if the rumors were true. She denied everything, of course, but the damage was done. Her carefully maintained image was starting to crack. People are talking, she told me one evening, pacing around our bedroom like a caged animal. Someone's spreading lies about me and Elliot. What kind of lies? I asked, though I already knew. That we're having an affair, that I'm planning to leave you. It's ridiculous. It does sound ridiculous, I agreed. I mean, why would anyone think that? Vanna stopped pacing and stared at me. For a moment, I thought she was going to confess everything. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and put her head in her hands. I don't know, she said. But it's affecting my work. People are looking at me differently. I sat beside her and put my arm around her shoulders, the same gesture I'd seen Elliot make in the park. Maybe you should distance yourself from Elliot for a while, I suggested, until this blows over. I can't do that. He needs me right now, especially with everything that's happening at work. What's more important? I asked. Your marriage or your friendship with Elliot? Vanna pulled away from me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, anger, maybe, or resentment. That's not fair, she said. You're asking me to abandon a friend when he's going through a difficult time. I'm asking you to prioritize your family. My family should trust me enough to know I'd never do anything to hurt them. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She was already doing things to hurt us. She just didn't know that I knew about it. That night after Vanna fell asleep, I sat in my office reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. Text messages, photos, financial records, recorded conversations. I had enough ammunition to destroy both Vanna and Elliot completely. But I wasn't ready to fire all my weapons yet. I wanted them to suffer the way I'd suffered. Slowly, gradually, watching everything they'd built crumble around them. The war had begun, and I was just getting started. 2 weeks into my campaign, Elliot Drake made his first major mistake. He underestimated me. I was monitoring his email when I intercepted a message he'd sent to a private investigator in downtown Chicago. He wanted someone to look into his accounting problems and find out who might be feeding information to his company's executives. The PI was expensive, the kind of guy who specialized in corporate espionage and wasn't too concerned about the legal niceties. The email included Elliot's suspicions about potential suspects, including several co-workers who might have access to his financial records. My name wasn't on the list, which told me that Elliot still thought of me as Vanna's harmless, passive husband rather than a threat. That was about to change. I forwarded Elliot's email to Gabe, along with a note. Time to take the gloves off. Gabe's response was immediate. Finally. I was getting bored. What Gabe did next was technically legal, but morally questionable. He created a fake identity for the private investigator Elliot had contacted and sent a response accepting the job. Then he arranged a meeting at a downtown hotel bar, where he planned to record Elliot attempting to hire someone to cover up his embezzlement. The beauty of this plan, Gabe explained over the phone, is that he's going to incriminate himself. All I have to do is ask the right questions and let him talk. What if he recognizes you? He's never seen me before, and I'm good at playing characters. Trust me, this will work. While Gabe was setting up Elliot, I focused on Vanna. The social pressure from her friends was starting to take its toll, but she was still meeting with Elliot regularly. According to the GPS tracker in her car, they'd started varying their locations more frequently, probably trying to avoid being seen together. That's when I decided to involve the twins. Maya and Jax were smart kids, smarter than most adults gave them credit for. They'd noticed the tension between their parents, and they'd started asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. But I realized they could be valuable allies if I handled the situation carefully. I need to talk to you two about something important, I said one evening while Vanna was at another late work meeting. We were in the living room, Maya curled up in the big armchair with a book, Jack sprawled on the couch with his tablet. They both looked up when I spoke, and I saw Vanna's intelligence in their eyes. Is it about you and Mom? Maya asked. Because we're not stupid. We know something's wrong. Yeah, Jax added. You guys have been acting weird for weeks. Are you getting divorced? The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on gathering evidence and planning my revenge that I hadn't considered how the situation was affecting the kids. I don't know, I said honestly. Your mom and I are having some problems, and I'm trying to figure out what to do about them. What kind of problems? Maya asked. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, even when they don't mean to, and sometimes those choices have consequences that affect the whole family. Is Mom having an affair? Jax asked bluntly. I stared at my son, wondering when he'd gotten old enough to ask such direct questions. What makes you think that? She's been acting different, staying out late, getting dressed up for work, checking her phone all the time. Plus, she's been talking to some guy named Elliot a lot. Maya nodded. We heard her on the phone with him last week. She was laughing the way she used to laugh with you. The observation stung because it was so accurate. I remembered when Vanna used to laugh like that with me, back when we were dating and everything felt possible. If I asked you two to help me with something, I said, something that might help me understand what's really going on, would you do it? The twins exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that siblings sometimes share. What kind of help? Maya asked. The kind that involves paying attention and remembering things. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would get you in trouble, just being observant. Like spies? Jax asked, his eyes lighting up. Like detectives, I corrected. People who gather information to solve problems. They agreed to help, though I made them promise not to do anything risky or confrontational. Their job was simply to listen and report back to me about anything unusual they observed. It was Maya who provided the breakthrough I'd been waiting for. 3 days later, she knocked on my office door while I was working on a client project. Dad, I think you need to hear this. She held up her phone, which was displaying a voice recording app. Mom was on the phone in the kitchen. She thought I was upstairs doing homework, but I heard her talking about money and Brazil and leaving Chicago. My hands were shaking as I took the phone and pressed play. Vanna's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. The PI you hired is asking too many questions. What if he finds out about the money you've been moving? Elliot's voice was harder to hear, but I could make out his response. He won't find anything. I've been careful. Besides, in 6 months, we'll be in Brazil, and none of this will matter. What about Kellan? He's not going to just let me take the kids. He won't have a choice. Once the divorce is final and we're married, we'll have legal standing. Brazilian courts favor intact family units. I still think we should wait until after... The recording cut off abruptly. Maya looked up at me with worried eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. She came back into the kitchen and I had to pretend I was getting a snack. I pulled my daughter into a hug, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and trying to process what I'd just heard. They weren't just planning to leave me. They were planning to take my children to another country where I might never see them again. The passive phase of my campaign was over. It was time to go on the offensive. That night, after Vanna went to bed, I called an emergency meeting with Clara and Gabe. We met at Murphy's Tavern after closing time, when the bar was empty except for the 3 of us and the lingering smell of fried food and spilled beer. They're planning to take the kids to Brazil, I said without preamble. Clara's face went white. They can't do that. They think they can, and if I don't stop them, they might be right. I played Maya's recording for them, watching their expressions change from concern to anger to determination. Okay, Gabe said when the recording ended. No more subtle moves. It's time to destroy these people. What do you have in mind? Clara asked. I pulled out a folder containing everything I'd gathered over the past month. Photos, financial records, recorded conversations, email transcripts, and a detailed timeline of Vanna and Elliot's relationship. Tomorrow night, Pinnacle Advertising is hosting their annual client appreciation dinner at the Fairmont Hotel, I said. It's a big event. All the major clients, company executives, industry press. Elliot will be there, probably with his wife. Vanna will be there too, representing her department. And, Clara prompted, and I'm going to make sure everyone at that dinner knows exactly what kind of people they're dealing with. Gabe grinned. I like where this is going. I outlined my plan. It was risky, potentially illegal, and guaranteed to cause maximum damage to both Vanna and Elliot's reputations. But after hearing that recording, I was past caring about the consequences. The next evening, I put on my best suit and drove to the Fairmont Hotel. The client appreciation dinner was in the hotel's grand ballroom, a glittering affair with crystal chandeliers and tables draped in white linen. I'd managed to get an invitation through a client who did business with Pinnacle Advertising, so my presence wouldn't seem suspicious. Vanna was there, wearing a black cocktail dress that showed off her figure and talking animatedly with a group of potential clients. She looked beautiful and confident, every inch the successful advertising executive. If I hadn't known about her plans to destroy our family, I might have been proud of her. Elliot was across the room, standing with his wife Lena and several company executives. He looked nervous, which made sense given the ongoing investigation into his financial irregularities. Lena looked elegant but distant, like a woman going through the motions of being a supportive spouse. I waited until the dinner portion of the evening was over and the presentations were about to begin. Then I made my move. Gabe had helped me prepare a multimedia presentation that would replace the company's planned slideshow. All I had to do was plug a USB drive into the hotel's audiovisual system and let technology do the rest. The presentation began innocuously enough, a standard corporate overview with charts and graphs about Pinnacle advertising success over the past year. But then the slides changed to something more personal. The first photo showed Vanna and Elliot together at the cafe where I'd first seen them. The timestamp in the corner indicated it was taken during regular business hours when they should have been working. The second photo showed them walking together in the park, Elliot's arm around Vanna's shoulders. The third photo was from the hidden camera in my living room, Elliot sitting on my couch, drinking my coffee, planning to steal my wife and children. A murmur ran through the ballroom as people began to realize what they were seeing. I watched Vanna's face go pale, then red, then pale again. Elliot looked like he was going to be sick, but I wasn't done yet. The next slides showed financial documents, bank records, forged invoices, and email exchanges that detailed Elliot's embezzlement scheme. The amounts were staggering, far more than even I had realized. The final slide was a transcript of the conversation Maya had recorded, with the key phrases highlighted in red. The money you've been moving in 6 months will be in Brazil. He won't have a choice. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Company executives were shouting questions, clients were demanding explanations, and reporters were taking photos of everything. In the middle of it all, Vanna and Elliot stood frozen like deer caught in headlights. I slipped out of the ballroom before anyone could identify me as the source of the presentation. But I didn't leave the hotel. Instead, I went to the bar and ordered a whiskey, waiting to see what would happen next. I didn't have to wait long. Within 30 minutes, hotel security was escorting Elliot out of the building while Lena Drake followed behind, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. Vanna left shortly after, her career at Pinnacle Advertising effectively over. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Holy crap! It's all over social media already. You actually did it." But I wasn't celebrating yet. The public humiliation was just the beginning. I had more ammunition to use, and I intended to use all of it. When I got home that night, Vanna was waiting for me in the living room. She'd changed out of her cocktail dress into jeans and a sweater, but she still looked shaken. "That was you," she said, as soon as I walked through the door. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Kellan. I know it was you. The photos, the financial records, the recording. How long have you been spying on me?" I poured myself another whiskey from the bar cart in the corner. "Long enough to know that you're planning to steal my children and flee the country with your embezzling boyfriend." Vanna's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. Then the mask slipped back into place. "You don't understand," she said. "Elliot and we're in love. Real love, not the comfortable arrangement we've had for the past few years." "Comfortable arrangement?" I repeated. "Is that what you call our marriage?" "Come on, Kellan. We both know we've been going through the motions for years. We're like roommates who happen to share children. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you looked at me like I was the most important person in your world?" The question stung because there was truth in it. Our marriage had become routine, predictable, safe. But that didn't justify what she'd done. "So, instead of talking to me about it, you decided to have an affair and plan to kidnap our children?" "I wasn't going to kidnap them. I was going to give them a better life, with a stepfather who could provide for them properly." "With stolen money?" Vanna's shoulders sagged. "I didn't know about the money at first. By the time I found out, I was already in too deep." "Too deep in what? Love or greed?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "What happens now?" she asked finally. I finished my whiskey and set the glass on the coffee table. "Now you're going to pack a bag and leave. Tonight. You can stay with one of your friends, or at a hotel, or in your car for all I care, but you're not staying in this house with my children. You can't throw me out. This is my house, too. Actually, I can. I've already filed for legal separation and obtained a temporary restraining order. It's being served tomorrow morning, but I'm giving you the courtesy of leaving voluntarily." Vanna stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. "I've just stopped pretending to be someone I'm not." She went upstairs to pack, and I sat in the living room listening to her move around our bedroom. 20 minutes later, she came back downstairs with a suitcase and her purse. "The kids," she started, "will be told that you and I are having problems and need some time apart. They'll stay with me for now." "Kellan, please, don't do this. We can work things out." I looked at the woman I'd loved for 15 years, the mother of my children, the person who'd planned to destroy everything I cared about. "You're right about one thing," I said. "We have been going through the motions for years, but the difference between us is that I was willing to work on our marriage. You were planning to abandon it." After she left, I went upstairs to check on the twins. They were both awake, sitting on Maya's bed and whispering to each other. "Is Mom coming back?" Jax asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But whatever happens, you two are my priority. We're going to get through this together." Maya hugged me tight. "I'm sorry I recorded Mom's phone call. I didn't mean to cause all this trouble." "You didn't cause anything, sweetheart. You just helped me understand what was really going on." But as I tucked my children into their beds and turned off the lights, I knew the war was far from over. Vanna and Elliot were wounded, but they weren't defeated. And wounded animals were often the most dangerous kind. I was going to have to be ready for whatever came next. The restraining order was served to Vanna at 8:47 a.m. the following morning, while she sat in her car outside Maya and Jax's school. I know the exact time because I was watching from across the street, documenting everything with a telephoto lens. She tried to approach the kids as they walked toward the building, but the process server intercepted her first. I watched through my camera as she read the legal documents, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. The restraining order was comprehensive. It prohibited her from coming within 500 feet of our house, the kids' school, or my workplace. She was allowed supervised visits with Maya and Jax, but only at a neutral location with a court-appointed mediator present. It was harsh, but necessary. After hearing that recording about taking the kids to Brazil, I wasn't taking any chances. My phone rang as Vanna drove away from the school. Clara's name appeared on the screen. "I just saw the news," she said. "Pinnacle Advertising fired Elliot this morning. It's all over the business section." "What about criminal charges?" "The article says they're cooperating with law enforcement, which usually means they're throwing him under the bus to save their own reputation." That was good news, but I wasn't ready to celebrate yet. Desperate people did desperate things, and Elliot Drake was about to become very desperate indeed. I was right to be cautious. That afternoon, while I was working in my home office, the doorbell rang. Through the security camera I'd installed, I could see a man in an expensive suit standing on my front porch. He was tall, silver-haired, and familiar, Elliot Drake, looking considerably less polished than in his corporate headshots. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "Can I help you?" "We need to talk," Elliot said. His voice was calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." "I think we do. May I come in?" "No." Elliot glanced around the neighborhood, probably checking to see if anyone was watching. "Look, I know you're angry. I understand why. But this doesn't have to get any uglier than it already has." "Uglier?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean uglier than planning to steal my wife and children? Uglier than embezzling money to finance your escape to Brazil? Exactly how much uglier are we talking?" His composure slipped for a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You've made your point. You've destroyed my career, my marriage, my reputation. Isn't that enough?" "Not even close." What do you want? Money? I can make this worth your while. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Are you trying to bribe me, Elliot? He realized his mistake immediately. I'm trying to find a reasonable solution to an unreasonable situation. The reasonable solution was for you to keep your hands off my wife. That ship has sailed. Elliot stepped closer, and I saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Brooks. You think you're some kind of mastermind, but you're just a small-time IT guy who got lucky. I have resources, connections, lawyers who eat people like you for breakfast. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. Back off, or you'll regret it. I stopped recording and smiled. Thanks for that. Threatening me on camera was exactly the kind of evidence I needed. Elliot's face went pale as he realized what he'd done. You can't use that. It was a private conversation. On my property, with my security cameras recording everything. Perfectly legal. I held up the phone. This is going straight to my lawyer, the police, and anyone else who might be interested in your attempts at witness intimidation. He left without another word, but I could see the rage in his posture as he walked back to his car. I made copies of the recording and sent them to 3 different locations, including a cloud storage account that Elliot couldn't access even if he tried. That evening, I sat down with Maya and Jax to explain what was happening. They deserved to know the truth, or at least an age-appropriate version of it. Your mom and I are getting divorced, I said. She made some choices that hurt our family, and we can't work things out. Because of that man, Elliot? Maya asked. I nodded. That's part of it. Are we going to have to choose between you and Mom? Jax wanted to know. No. You're going to live with me, but you'll still see your mother regularly. A judge will help us figure out the details. What if she tries to take us away? Maya asked. Like, to another country or something? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't realized the kids had overheard that much of their mother's plans. That's not going to happen, I said firmly. I won't let it happen. But even as I said the words, I wondered if I could keep that promise. Desperate people did desperate things, and Vanna was about to become very desperate indeed. I found out just how desperate the next morning. I woke up to discover that someone had been in my house during the night. Nothing was stolen, but things had been moved. Papers on my desk were out of order, my computer had been turned on, and the hidden cameras had been disabled. It was a professional job. Whoever had done it knew what they were looking for and how to avoid leaving obvious traces. But they'd made one mistake. They hadn't found all of my surveillance equipment. The backup camera in the kitchen had captured everything. The intruder was a woman I didn't recognize, tall, blonde, wearing dark clothes and latex gloves. She moved through my house like she owned it, photographing documents, copying files from my computer, and searching through my personal belongings. But it was what happened next that really got my attention. At 3:17 a.m., the woman's phone rang. She answered it immediately, keeping her voice low but not low enough to avoid the sensitive microphones I'd installed. I'm in, she said. But there's a problem. He's got copies of everything stored in multiple locations. Taking out the computer won't be enough. The voice on the other end was muffled, but I could make out enough words to understand the conversation. Someone was giving her instructions about what to look for and what to do if she found it. What about the kids? The woman asked. If we can't neutralize the evidence, maybe we can create some leverage. My heart stopped. They were talking about using Maya and Jax as leverage against me. The conversation continued for several more minutes, but I'd heard enough. I called the police immediately and sent them copies of the recording along with the video footage. By noon, the police had identified the intruder as Patricia Voss, a private investigator with a reputation for working in the gray areas of the law. She was arrested at her office while trying to destroy evidence of her break-in. But the most interesting part came when she was questioned about who had hired her. Patricia Voss was smart enough to ask for a lawyer before saying anything incriminating, but she wasn't smart enough to encrypt her phone properly. The police found text messages linking her to Elliot Drake, along with payment records showing he'd hired her to retrieve stolen property from my house. Elliot was arrested that afternoon on charges of burglary, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. His bail was set at $500,000, which he couldn't afford now that his assets had been frozen as part of the embezzlement investigation. Vanna wasn't directly implicated in the break-in, but her association with Elliot made her look guilty by association. More importantly, it gave me additional ammunition for the custody hearing that was scheduled for the following week. That's when Lena Drake contacted me. I was working in my office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Brooks, this is Lena Drake, Elliot's wife, ex-wife actually. I filed for divorce this morning. I'm sorry to hear about your situation," I said, though I wasn't particularly sorry. "I'm calling because I think we can help each other. I have information about Elliot and your wife that you might find useful, and I suspect you have information that could help me in my divorce proceedings." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, far from anywhere we might be recognized. Lena Drake was even more elegant in person than in her social media photos, but there was a hardness in her eyes that suggested she'd learned some unpleasant truths about her husband. "How long have you known?" she asked after we'd ordered our drinks. "About the affair? A few weeks? About the embezzlement?" "Not as long. I've suspected for months, but I didn't have proof. Elliot was always careful to keep his business separate from our personal life, but after your little presentation at the hotel, I hired my own investigator." She slid a manila folder across the table. Bank records, property deeds, investment accounts, everything Elliot thought he'd hidden from me. He's been planning this for over a year. I opened the folder and scanned the documents. The scope of Elliot's deception was staggering. He'd been systematically moving money out of their joint accounts, purchasing property in Brazil under false names, and setting up offshore accounts to hide his stolen assets. "There's more," Lena said. "Elliot wasn't planning to take just your wife to Brazil. He was planning to take your children too, and he was going to use forged documents to make it look legal." She handed me another set of papers, passport applications, birth certificates, and custody documents that would have given Elliot legal guardianship of Maya and Jax once he and Vanna were married. "He had it all planned out," Lena continued. "The embezzlement was just the funding mechanism. The real goal was to steal your family and disappear where you couldn't follow." I stared at the forged documents, feeling a cold rage settle in my chest. This wasn't just an affair or even a financial crime. This was a systematic plan to destroy my life and steal my children. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I want to destroy him as completely as he's destroyed me, and because those children don't deserve to be pawns in his game." We spent the next hour planning our strategy. Lena had access to financial records and legal documents that I couldn't have obtained on my own. I had surveillance footage and recorded conversations that she could use in her divorce proceedings. Together, we had enough evidence to ensure that Elliot Drake would spend the next decade in prison and that Vanna would never get custody of Maya and Jax. But I wasn't satisfied with just winning. I wanted total victory, the kind of comprehensive defeat that would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider betraying me. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. I spent the week preparing my case with a lawyer who specialized in high-conflict divorce situations. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, financial documents, surveillance footage, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Vanna's lawyer tried to paint me as a controlling husband who had driven his wife into the arms of another man through neglect and emotional abuse. It was a desperate strategy that might have worked if I hadn't had so much evidence of her premeditated betrayal. The judge reviewed everything: the recordings, the photos, the financial documents, and the forged custody papers that would have given Elliot legal control over my children. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold with disgust. "Mrs. Brooks, I have reviewed the evidence presented by your husband, and I find it both compelling and deeply disturbing. The court finds that you engaged in a systematic plan to defraud your husband, steal marital assets, and unlawfully remove minor children from the jurisdiction of this court. Vanna's face went white. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. Furthermore, the court finds that your association with Mr. Drake, who is currently facing federal charges for embezzlement and conspiracy, demonstrates a pattern of poor judgment that calls into question your fitness as a parent. The judge awarded me full custody of Maya and Jax, with Vanna receiving only supervised visitation rights. He also ordered her to pay restitution for the marital assets she'd helped Elliot steal, and granted me exclusive use of the family home. It was everything I'd hoped for, and more. But the best part came after the hearing, when Vanna approached me in the courthouse hallway. "You've won," she said, her voice hollow. "Are you happy now?" "Happy?" I considered the question. "No, I'm not happy. I'm satisfied. There's a difference. What's going to happen to me? That's not my problem anymore. You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences." She started to say something else, but I walked away. I had more important things to do, like taking my kids out for ice cream and starting to rebuild the life she'd tried to destroy. The war was almost over, but I had one more battle to fight. And this one was going to be the most satisfying of all. Elliot Drake's trial began on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I wasn't required to testify. The evidence spoke for itself, but I attended every day of the proceedings, sitting in the back row of the courtroom like a ghost haunting the scene of his downfall. The prosecution painted a picture of systematic fraud and betrayal that went far beyond simple embezzlement. Elliot hadn't just stolen money from Pinnacle Advertising. He'd destroyed the lives of everyone who'd trusted him. His clients lost millions when their accounts were raided. His co-workers lost their jobs when the company downsized to cover the losses. His wife lost her marriage, her home, and her faith in human nature. And he'd planned to steal my children. The defense tried to portray Elliot as a man driven to desperation by a failing marriage and mounting financial pressures. They argued that his relationship with Vanna was genuine love, not calculated manipulation, and that his crimes were motivated by a desire to provide for the woman he cared about. It was a touching story that might have generated sympathy if the jury hadn't seen the forged custody documents and heard the recordings of Elliot discussing my children like property to be acquired. The trial lasted 8 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Elliot was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. He was also ordered to pay restitution to Pinnacle Advertising and their clients, an amount that exceeded $3 million. I watched his face as the judge read the sentence. There was no emotion there, just the blank stare of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. Vanna wasn't in the courtroom. She'd moved back to her hometown in Ohio after the custody hearing, taking a job at a small marketing firm for a fraction of her previous salary. The kids talked to her on the phone twice a week, but the conversations were stilted and uncomfortable. Maya and Jax were polite but distant, like they were talking to a stranger who happened to share their DNA. But my victory wasn't complete yet. There was still one loose thread that needed to be tied up. Patricia Voss, the private investigator who'd broken into my house, had plea bargained her way to a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against Elliot. But she'd also provided information about other crimes that hadn't been prosecuted, including a plan to kidnap Maya and Jax if the legal custody battle hadn't gone in Elliot's favor. The plan was detailed and chilling. Patricia had identified the kids' routines, mapped out their routes to and from school, and even selected a safe house where they could be held until Elliot and Vanna could flee the country. The only reason it hadn't been implemented was because Elliot was arrested before he could give the final order. This information gave me leverage for one last move in my campaign against the people who'd tried to destroy my family. I arranged to meet with Vanna at a neutral location, a family restaurant in suburban Chicago where we were unlikely to encounter anyone we knew. She'd driven down from Ohio for the meeting, probably hoping I was ready to negotiate some kind of reconciliation. She was wrong. Vanna looked older than her 39 years, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months earlier. She'd lost weight, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. The confident, polished woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who looked defeated and worn down by circumstances. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, as we sat down in a corner booth. "I wasn't sure you would." I almost didn't. But there are some things we need to discuss. The kids? Among other things. A waitress brought us coffee and menus, but neither of us was interested in food. This wasn't a social visit. "I want to see them more," Vanna said. "The supervised visits are humiliating, and 2 hours every other week isn't enough time to maintain a real relationship." "That's not going to happen. Kellan, please. I know I made mistakes, but they're still my children. I love them." "Do you?" "Because the evidence suggests otherwise." I pulled out a folder containing copies of the documents Patricia Voss had provided to the FBI. Vanna's face went pale as she recognized what she was looking at. "You were going to let him take them," I said quietly. "You were going to help Elliot kidnap our children if the custody hearing didn't go your way." "That's not true. I never agreed to anything like that." "Your text messages say otherwise." I opened the folder and pulled out transcripts of conversations between Vanna and Elliot. Here's one from 3 days before the custody hearing. "If the judge rules against us, we'll have to consider other options. The kids will understand eventually." Vanna stared at the papers, her hands shaking. "You don't understand. I was scared. Elliot said you were trying to turn the children against me, that you'd never let me see them again. So you decided to help him steal them instead." I thought if we could just get away, start fresh somewhere else, we could all be happy. The kids would have a stepfather who could provide for them, and we'd be a real family. With stolen money, in a foreign country, using forged documents. Vanna's composure finally cracked. Tears started streaming down her face and her voice broke as she spoke. "I know how it looks, but it wasn't supposed to happen that way. Elliot said he had everything under control, that no one would get hurt. No one except me. No one except our children, who would have been traumatized by being kidnapped and taken away from everything they knew." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." "But they did go this far, and now you have to live with the consequences." I closed the folder and leaned back in the booth. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a document relinquishing all parental rights to Maya and Jax. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges against you for conspiracy to commit kidnapping." Vanna's head snapped up. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. The FBI has enough evidence to charge you as an accessory to Elliot's crimes. The only reason you haven't been arrested yet is because I asked them to hold off while we had this conversation. Those are my children. I gave birth to them, raised them. You plan to help steal them. That's not the action of a loving mother. That's the action of a criminal." We stared at each other across the table, and I saw the moment when she realized I wasn't bluffing. The evidence was real, the threat was real, and her options were extremely limited. "If I sign the papers," she said slowly, "what happens to me? You go back to Ohio and try to build a new life. You stay away from my family and we pretend this conversation never happened. And if I don't sign? You get arrested, prosecuted, and probably sentenced to 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Maya and Jax grow up knowing their mother is a convicted felon who tried to help kidnap them." Vanna was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the parking lot where ordinary people were going about their ordinary lives. Finally, she looked back at me with eyes that were red from crying, but strangely resolved. You've changed, she said. The man I married would never have been this ruthless. The man you married trusted you. That man was naive and foolish, and he paid a price for those weaknesses. I learned from his mistakes. She signed the papers. I had them notarized at a nearby bank, then filed them with the family court that afternoon. By evening, Vanna Brooks was no longer the legal mother of Maya and Jax Brooks. She was just a woman who'd once been married to their father, with no more claim on them than any other stranger. That night, I sat in my living room with the twins, helping them with homework and listening to them talk about their day at school. They seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. They still asked about their mother occasionally, but the questions were becoming less frequent and less urgent. "Dad," Maya said as I was tucking her into bed, "are you happy now?" It was the same question Vanna had asked me after the custody hearing, but coming from my daughter, it carried different weight. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "It's been a difficult time for all of us, but I think we're going to be okay." "Good," she said, hugging me tight. "I want you to be happy." As I turned off the lights and closed her bedroom door, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. I'd lost a wife, gained full custody of my children, destroyed 2 people who'd tried to betray me, and learned things about myself that I wasn't entirely comfortable knowing. Was I happy? Not exactly. Happiness seemed like too simple a word for the complex mix of emotions I was feeling. I was satisfied with the outcome of my campaign, proud of how I'd protected my children, and relieved that the immediate threats to my family had been neutralized. But I was also changed in ways that couldn't be undone. The man who'd trusted blindly and loved unconditionally was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. Someone who understood that the world was full of people who would take everything you had if you let them. Someone who would never let them. The war was over, but its lessons would stay with me forever. And if anyone else ever tried to threaten my family, they would discover that Kellan Brooks was no longer the passive, trusting man he'd once been. He was someone much more dangerous. 6 months after Vanna signed away her parental rights, I thought the worst was behind us. Maya and Jax had settled into new routines, their grades were improving, and the 3 of us had developed the kind of close relationship that I'd always wanted but never quite achieved when Vanna was part of the equation. I was wrong about the worst being behind us. It started with a phone call on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I was helping Jax with a science project when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. "Kellan Brooks?" The voice was female, nervous, with a slight Midwestern accent. "Yes?" "This is Patricia Voss. I think we need to talk." Patricia Voss. The private investigator who'd broken into my house, been arrested, and plea bargained her way to a reduced sentence. The woman who'd provided the evidence that allowed me to destroy what remained of Vanna's relationship with our children. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," I said. "Elliot's getting out." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible. He was sentenced to 12 years. Appeals court overturned the conviction on a technicality, something about improper search procedures when they seized his computers. He's being released pending a new trial." I felt the room spin around me. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." "And Mr. Brooks?" "He's not happy about what happened to him. He blames you for everything, the arrest, the trial, losing his wife, his reputation. He's been planning his revenge for months." The line went quiet, except for the sound of rain against the windows. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have children too, and because what Elliot's planning, it's not just about you anymore." After Patricia hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone and trying to process what I'd just learned. Elliot Drake, the man who'd tried to steal my wife and children, who'd planned to kidnap Maya and Jax if his legal maneuvers failed, was about to walk free, and he was planning revenge. I called my lawyer first, then the FBI agent who'd handled Elliot's case. Both conversations were frustrating and ultimately useless. The legal system that had protected me was now protecting him. Until he actually did something illegal, there was nothing law enforcement could do. But I wasn't law enforcement, and I'd learned a lot about taking matters into my own hands over the past year. I spent that night making preparations. I updated the security system, checked the locks on all the doors and windows, and made sure the hidden cameras were functioning properly. I also called Clara and Gabe, explaining the situation and asking for their help. "How do you want to handle this?" Clara asked. "I'm not sure yet, but I want to be ready for whatever he tries." "Maybe it's time to go on the offensive," Gabe suggested. "Hit him before he can hit you." The idea was tempting, but I had Maya and Jax to think about. Any action I took had to be carefully calculated to minimize the risk to my children. Elliot made his first move 3 days later. I was at work when my phone buzzed with an alert from the home security system. Someone was in my backyard, moving around the perimeter of the house. The cameras showed a figure in dark clothes and a baseball cap, staying in the shadows and avoiding the motion sensor lights. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the intruder was gone. The only evidence of his presence was a small device attached to the electrical meter, a listening device that would have allowed him to monitor conversations inside the house. "Professional job," the responding officer said as he examined the device. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. I didn't mention Elliot's name. I didn't have proof it was him, and I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing his intimidation tactics were working. But I knew it was him, and I knew this was just the beginning. The second move came a week later. Maya and Jax were walking home from school when a man in an expensive car pulled up beside them and started asking questions. Where did they live? Were their parents home? Would they like a ride? The kids were smart enough to run, and they called me immediately. By the time I got to the school, the car was gone, but the principal had gotten a partial license plate number. It traced back to a rental car agency. The person who'd rented it had used a fake ID, but the security footage showed a man who looked remarkably like Elliot Drake. "We need to end this," Clara said when I told her what had happened. "He's escalating. Next time, he might actually try to grab the kids." She was right. Elliot was testing my defenses, probing for weaknesses. He was planning something bigger, and I needed to stop him before he could implement it. That's when I decided to set a trap. The plan was simple but risky. I would create an opportunity for Elliot to make his move, but on my terms and in a location where I had every advantage. I started by changing my routine, making it appear that I was letting my guard down. I also spread rumors through mutual acquaintances that I was planning to take the kids on a weekend trip to my cabin in Wisconsin. The cabin didn't exist, but Elliot wouldn't know that. What he would know was that it would be the perfect opportunity to intercept us somewhere between Chicago and the supposed cabin location. The trap was set for a Friday evening in early April. I loaded the kids into my SUV along with camping gear and suitcases, making it look like we were heading out for a long weekend. But instead of driving north toward Wisconsin, I took a circuitous route that led to an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. Gabe was waiting there with surveillance equipment and backup plans. Clara was positioned at a nearby location with instructions to call the police if things went wrong. And I had enough recording devices to document whatever Elliot tried to do. We didn't have to wait long. Elliot's rental car appeared in my rearview mirror about 20 minutes into the drive. He was following at a distance, probably thinking he was being subtle. But I'd been expecting him, and I'd chosen my route specifically to make it easy for him to follow. I led him through a series of increasingly isolated roads until we reached the industrial complex. Then I pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse and waited. Maya and Jax were nervous but excited. I'd explained that we were helping to catch a bad man who wanted to hurt our family, and they'd insisted on being part of the plan. They were hidden in the back of the SUV with instructions to stay down and keep quiet no matter what happened. Elliot's car pulled into the parking lot 5 minutes later. He parked about 50 yards away and sat there for a moment, probably trying to figure out what was happening. Then he got out of the car and started walking toward my SUV. He looked older than I remembered, with gray stubble and lines around his eyes that suggested his time in prison hadn't been easy, but there was something dangerous in his posture, a coiled tension that suggested he was ready for violence. I got out of my SUV and walked toward him, keeping my hands visible and my voice calm. "Hello, Elliot." "Brooks." His voice was hoarse, like he'd been shouting. "I've been looking forward to this conversation." "Have you?" "Because I have to say, following my children around and trying to lure them into cars isn't the kind of conversation most people would approve of." His face twisted into something that might have been a smile. "Those kids should have been mine. If you hadn't interfered, Vanna and I would be married by now, and they'd have a real father instead of a pathetic IT nerd who spies on his own wife." A real father who planned to kidnap them and take them to another country using forged documents? I was going to give them a better life, more opportunities, better schools, a stepfather who could actually provide for them. With stolen money. Elliot shrugged. "Details. The point is, you destroyed everything I worked for. My career, my marriage, my freedom. You turned Vanna against me and poisoned my own wife with lies." "I didn't have to turn anyone against you. I just showed them who you really were. And now I'm going to show you who I really am." He reached into his jacket, and for a moment I thought he was going for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a manila envelope. "Photos," he said, tossing the envelope at my feet. "Very interesting photos of you and your sister and your tech friend planning your little revenge scheme, breaking into my accounts, hacking my email, planting evidence, conspiracy, fraud, computer crimes, enough to put you away for 20 years. I looked down at the envelope, but didn't pick it up. "Even if those photos were real, which I doubt, what makes you think anyone would believe a convicted felon over a law-abiding citizen?" "Because I'm not a convicted felon anymore. The appeals court threw out my conviction, remember? I'm just a businessman who was wrongly accused by a jealous husband. A businessman who's currently violating the terms of his bail by stalking my family." Elliot's smile widened. "Am I stalking your family? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you lured me here. You set this whole thing up, didn't you? The fake trip to Wisconsin, the isolated location, the surveillance equipment your friend is probably using to record this conversation." He was smarter than I'd given him credit for, but not smart enough. "You're right," I said. "I did set this up, but not for the reasons you think." I pulled out my phone and played a recording, the conversation we'd just had, including his admission that he'd been following my children and his threats about the photos. Bail violation, witness intimidation, stalking, and attempted extortion, I said. "That should be enough to get you sent back to prison while you wait for your new trial." Elliot's face went pale, then red, then pale again. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won?" "I know I've won." "We'll see about that." He turned and started walking back toward his car, but he only made it about 10 steps before the parking lot filled with flashing lights. Police cars surrounded the industrial complex, and officers emerged with weapons drawn. "Elliot Drake, you're under arrest for violation of bail conditions, stalking, and witness intimidation." As the police handcuffed Elliot and read him his rights, he looked back at me with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over, Brooks. Even if I go back to prison, there are people who owe me favors, people who can reach you and your family anywhere." "Is that another threat?" I asked, holding up my phone. "Because I'm still recording." The last thing I saw of Elliot Drake was his face in the back window of a police car, staring at me with the kind of rage that suggested he'd never stop trying to destroy me. But I wasn't worried anymore. I'd learned something important over the past year. When you fight monsters, You have to be willing to become a little monstrous yourself. And I'd discovered that I was very good at being monstrous when my family was threatened. As the police cars drove away and the parking lot returned to silence, Maya and Jax emerged from the back of the SUV. "Is it over?" Maya asked. "It's over," I said, pulling both of them into a hug. "The bad man can't hurt us anymore." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. There would always be bad people in the world. People who wanted to take what didn't belong to them and hurt innocent families for their own selfish reasons. The difference was that now I knew how to fight them, and I knew that I would never again be the passive, trusting man who'd almost lost everything to his wife's betrayal. I was someone harder now, someone more dangerous, someone who understood that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to destroy the people who threaten them. And I was perfectly comfortable with that transformation. The war was finally over, but the lessons it had taught me would last forever. Maya and Jax were safe. Vanna was out of our lives permanently, and Elliot was back in prison where he belonged. I had won completely and decisively, and everyone who'd tried to destroy my family had paid the price for their betrayal. It was exactly the ending I'd planned for, and it was more satisfying than I'd ever imagined possible. As we drove home through the quiet streets of Chicago, I looked at my children in the rearview mirror and smiled. We'd been through hell together, but we'd emerged stronger and closer than ever before. And anyone who tried to threaten us in the future would discover that Kellan Brooks was no longer someone to be underestimated. He was someone to be feared,